It was a crisp October morning in Washington, D.C., and the air around Capitol Hill buzzed with a palpable electricity. Cameras were being set up, aides scurried around like ants, and the press gallery overflowed with journalists eager to witness what had been billed as the Oversight Committee hearing of the decade. The topic, federal accountability in border crisis management. But the real draw? The fiery, unfiltered Congresswoman from Texas, Jasmine Crockett, was set to go head-to-head with the newly sworn-in Vice President JD Vance. JD Vance, once known for his best-selling memoir Hillbilly Elegy, had climbed the political ranks under the tutelage of President Donald Trump. Charismatic, razor-sharp, and unapologetically direct, Vance had become Trump's right-hand man in the new administration. Unlike many before him, Vance did not play politics in half measures. He leaned into the fire, not away from it. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, had built a reputation as a fierce progressive, unafraid to call out injustice, systemic racism, or the conservative establishment. Her social media was ablaze with viral mic drops and sound bites. To her supporters, she was a champion of the voiceless. To her critics, she was theatrical and combative. Today, she was aiming her sights squarely at JD Vance. The hearing room filled to capacity, cameras streaming live to millions across the country. Crockett sat poised, brows furrowed, flipping through a thick binder of notes. JD Vance walked in with a quiet confidence, nodding politely to committee members. He took his seat beside the Homeland Security Secretary, folded his hands, and looked calmly across the room. Chairwoman Rosa Delgado banged the gavel. This hearing is now in session. We welcome Vice President JD Vance and members of the committee. We'll begin with statements, followed by questions. Routine introductions rolled by, but anticipation peaked when the chairwoman said, "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, you may proceed." The room fell silent. Jasmine adjusted her mic. "Thank you, Madam Chair." "Mr. Vice President," she said, leaning in, "the American people deserve answers. What we see at the southern border isn't just a humanitarian crisis, it's a failure of leadership. Your administration's policies have led to record deportations, family separations, and images that haunt every decent American. Are you proud of that legacy?" The crowd murmured. Cameras zoomed in. Crockett's words were forceful, laced with emotion. She was just warming up. JD Vance didn't blink. He reached for the mic. "Congresswoman, I appreciate your passion. But what I'm proud of is restoring sovereignty and safety to our borders. What haunts me is a fentanyl crisis that's killing thousands every month. What haunts me is human trafficking rings operating freely because of the previous administration's chaos." Crockett fired back instantly. "That's rich coming from someone whose party profits off fear-mongering and builds cages for children." JD Vance's smile faded. He leaned forward, voice steady and firm. "Congresswoman, I suggest you check the dates. Those so-called cages were built in 2014 under the Obama-Biden administration, which you conveniently ignore. My job isn't to peddle narratives, it's to protect this country." The room erupted in gasps. The exchange had just gone nuclear. Crockett looked momentarily stunned, but only momentarily. She regrouped, leaning in closer. "I don't need a history lecture from a vice president who uses Appalachia hardship as a political branding tool while doing nothing to uplift real working-class people. Tell me, how many Ohioans have benefited from your border obsession?" JD Vance, cool as ice, replied, "More than benefited from performative outrage on social media. Real change doesn't come from retweets, Congresswoman. It comes from hard policies, even when they're unpopular. And let's not pretend the working class is a slogan. You abandoned them long ago when you sided with Silicon Valley over steelworkers." The blow landed. Crockett's eyes narrowed. JD's words cut deep, not because they were loud, but because they were clinical, surgical in precision. The hearing wasn't even halfway over. "Congresswoman," he replied, "you talk a lot about the marginalized, but your policies create more of them. You support open borders, but who suffers? Black communities flooded with drugs and crime. You support ESG and green mandates, but who loses their jobs? Union workers in Detroit and Pittsburgh. You say you fight for them, but they're not in your district. They're in mine." A hush fell over the room. Even those usually bored by politics felt the tension. This wasn't just political theater anymore. This was something deeper. Two wildly different visions of America were clashing in real time. Chairwoman Rosa Delgado tried to bring some order. "Let's please stay focused on the issue of border policy." But the fire couldn't be contained. "I don't have to represent Pittsburgh to care about people in it," Jasmine fired back. But don't pretend to care about working-class folks when your biggest donors sit in luxury boardrooms and fund anti-union campaigns. JD didn't flinch. And don't pretend to care about justice when you defend policies that destroy black small businesses with crime and regulation. You're good at shouting, Congresswoman, but not so great at solving. Jasmine stood up, finger-pointing. You don't get to sit there and pretend to be a moral authority. Not when this administration lets border agents on horses whip migrants. Not when you criminalize the poor while enriching your cronies. The vice president stayed seated, but his voice rose. You want to talk about morality? You cheered as cities burned in 2020. You supported defunding police while hiding behind private security. I've walked through Ohio towns where people cry for law and order. They don't want slogans, they want safety. Something your ideology can't deliver. A moment of stunned silence. Jasmine sat back down, breathing heavy but eyes burning with defiance. JD calmly sipped water, his gaze unwavering. Behind them, staffers were texting frantically. Social media lit up like wildfire. Hashtag Vance vs. Crockett was trending across the nation. Every news channel was replaying the exchange. Fox News called it a masterclass by the VP. MSNBC called it a brutal clash of ideologies. Independents weren't sure what to make of it, only that it was raw, real, and riveting. And in the White House, President Donald Trump was watching with popcorn in hand. He turned to his chief of staff and grinned. That's my guy. The hearing recessed for lunch, but no one was eating. Inside the halls of Congress, it felt more like the aftermath of a heavyweight boxing match than a committee session. Reporters mobbed both parties. Interns ran to Starbucks only to abandon orders midline to check Twitter trends. Members of Congress huddled in corners whispering assessments. The political establishment was divided. Progressive Democrats praised Jasmine Crockett for standing up to authoritarianism and calling out hypocrisy. Meanwhile, conservatives hailed JD Vance for exposing radical double standards and holding the line on American values. But it was the independents, the elusive center, that politicians were watching most closely. And early polling trends weren't comforting for the left. JD's calm, cutting responses were resonating far beyond MAGA circles. In swing counties of Pennsylvania and Michigan, undecided voters started quoting Vance's lines about factories, fentanyl, and forgotten Americans. Inside a Democratic strategy room just blocks away, Jasmine Crockett's chief aide, Priya Desai, spoke quickly into her phone. We need her prepped, de-prepped. Vance was too smooth. We underestimated his on-camera discipline. Jasmine stood nearby, fuming. I'm not backing down. I'm going back in there and finishing this. Priya looked up. You can, but next time keep it policy first. When he pivots personal, steer him back. Don't take the bait. Meanwhile, inside the vice president's office, JD Vance sat quietly with his advisors, watching clips of the exchange. He rewound Jasmine's line about him, selling out for power 3 times, studying his own face. His chief strategist, Marcus Ray, nodded approvingly. Sir, you crushed that. Her base is fired up. But the middle? The middle sees you as a steady hand. Vance exhaled. It's not about crushing anyone. It's about contrast. She brought heat. I brought ballast. Marcus chuckled. Ballast with a sledgehammer, maybe? Back in the hearing room, cameras reset. The nation tuned in once again as Chairwoman Delgado tapped her gavel. We now resume the hearing on federal border enforcement strategies. Congresswoman Crockett, you may continue. Jasmine, now more measured, returned to policy. Mr. Vice President, she began, if we're going to talk facts, let's do it. According to the DHS Inspector General's latest report, there's been a 32% increase in asylum seekers being denied due process due to administrative backlog. How does your administration justify this? JD Vance nodded. An excellent question. And I agree it's unacceptable. That's why this administration has added 1,200 new immigration judges and streamlined digital processing systems at ports of entry. We're fixing the mess left behind, not ignoring it. Jasmine followed up. Yet these new systems come with AI monitoring tools that have already misidentified dozens of asylum applicants, including children. Does safety override accuracy? Vance responded, safety and accuracy aren't mutually exclusive. That's why we're auditing every instance of misidentification. But let me be clear, a porous border costs lives, American and migrant. I won't sacrifice security at the altar of perfection. This round was more cerebral. Less heat, more substance. Still, sparks flew, just a different kind. At one point, Crockett flipped the script. You talk about protecting American lives. So tell me, what's the administration doing to dismantle the root causes of mass migration? Poverty, corruption, climate change? Vance leaned forward. I believe in confronting root causes. But our first duty is to our own citizens. You want to fix Central America? Fine. But not at the cost of Newark or Cincinnati or East St. Louis. He locked eyes with Jasmine. Foreign compassion without domestic commitment is not virtue, it's abandonment. That one hit hard. Crockett, visibly rattled but undeterred, shifted her strategy. So America first means America only? JD shook his head. No. It means America first doesn't mean America last. Gasps again. Not because it was loud, but because it was devastatingly clear. Like Reagan's best lines or Obama's "Yes, we can," it would be replayed for days. The hearing ended with procedural remarks, but the real hearing, the court of public opinion, was just getting started. CNN called it a lesson in political jiu-jitsu. Fox News declared Vance a rising juggernaut. And Jasmine? She was trending #1 on TikTok. But in the Oval Office, Donald Trump wasn't worried about TikTok. He looked up from the coverage and said to his son, Don Jr., Vance is ready for 2028. She handed him the platform. And he built a fortress out of it. By the next morning, every major outlet in the country had run primetime breakdowns of the Vance versus Crockett exchange. From the late-night hosts to morning talk shows, America wasn't just watching. They were debating, dissecting, and taking sides. But the ripple effect extended far beyond television studios. In Ohio, in a quiet steelworker town just outside of Youngstown, JD Vance's words played on the local radio station over breakfast. Retired factory worker Hank Miller sipped his black coffee, staring at the toaster-sized AM/FM radio in his kitchen. Guys got grit, Hank mumbled to himself. About time someone in Washington talks like us again. His wife, Lorraine, raised a skeptical eyebrow. That congresswoman made some points, too. You didn't hear how she called him out on that Trump flip-flop. Hank shrugged. She had fire. But Vance? Vance had direction. Across the country in Texas, Jasmine Crockett's home turf, the sentiment was vastly different. In a community center on the south side of Dallas, local activists were gathered with volunteers for an impromptu town hall. A projector displayed the hearing highlights, and Crockett's most impassioned moments were met with cheers. That's the energy we need in D.C., one attendee shouted. She's not afraid to throw punches and speak truth to these right-wing bullies, another added. Jasmine's campaign team was already planning the next media blitz, framing the confrontation as a progressive firebrand holding power accountable. Her comms director, Priya Desai, was organizing a podcast tour, a sit-down with the Breakfast Club, and a CNN town hall. She became the voice of the left overnight, Priya said confidently. And this wasn't a loss, it was ignition. But in Washington, the calculus was more nuanced. Political insiders knew the hearing had done something rare. It had shifted the political chessboard. JD Vance, previously seen as a cautious and calculating second-in-command, was suddenly the front-facing gladiator of the Trump administration. And Jasmine Crockett, once a rising voice among progressives, had been thrust onto a national stage faster than her team had planned for. The White House press corps grilled Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at her daily briefing. Question: does President Trump believe VP Vance's exchange with Congresswoman Crockett helps or hurts the administration? Caroline: President Trump believes Vice President Vance stood firm for the American people, for border security, and for truth. That's what leadership looks like. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Democratic leadership had a quiet huddle. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries sat with Jasmine behind closed doors. You're a fighter, he said. But now the spotlight's on. That means every word, every pause, every gesture will be amplified. You ready for that kind of pressure? Jasmine leaned forward, eyes tired but defiant. Born ready. Jeffries smiled faintly. Good. Because next month you're on the panel for the economic equity hearings. And you better believe Vance will be watching. The internet wasn't done. Clips of Vance's calm one-liners flooded conservative Twitter. Commentators like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh dubbed him the next Reagan minus the polish. Meanwhile, progressive TikTokers were remixing Jasmine's rebuttals with trap beats and hashtags like hashtag Crockett clapback and hashtag powerful and poised. She had quickly become a cultural symbol, especially among Gen Z voters, of resistance to what they called MAGA authoritarianism. But the deeper question was this: who had changed the narrative? Some pundits argued that Jasmine won the battle, but JD won the war because he'd successfully reframed border security as a bipartisan concern while appearing rational and composed. Others insisted Jasmine's fiery defense would energize the progressive base and accelerate her rise as a voice for the voiceless. The irony? Both were right. In a quiet moment that night, JD Vance stood alone in his office. He stared out at the Capitol dome glowing in the night sky, his mind racing, not with victory but with vision. He picked up his phone and texted President Trump. "Vance, the next hearings, can I take the lead again?" Trump, after a pause, "You just might be leading more than hearings soon." Weeks had passed since the now legendary confrontation between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Vice President JD Vance, but the aftershocks were still felt across every branch of American life, political, cultural, and personal. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It had become a movement. For Jasmine Crockett, the fire only grew. She had quickly become the most requested guest on progressive media. Her appearance on The Daily Show earned record viewership, and her face graced the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Woman Who Spoke Up." Her campaign donations skyrocketed. Small-dollar contributions from college students, working mothers, and urban organizers poured in. Crockett used the momentum to launch a Justice in Policy tour, traveling to Atlanta, Chicago, Oakland, and even conservative strongholds like West Virginia to connect with working-class voters. But behind the applause, Jasmine felt the weight of her rising star. The expectations. The scrutiny. The tightrope walk of being real enough for the grassroots and disciplined enough for the DNC. At one town hall in Baltimore, a young girl named Samara stood up during Q&A. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said shyly, "how do you stay brave when everyone's yelling at you?" Jasmine paused, visibly emotional. "I remember who I'm doing it for. And as long as girls like you are watching, I can't afford to be afraid." Thunderous applause. Backstage, her campaign manager leaned in. "You just won 2028's opening debate, and we're not even there yet." Meanwhile, JD Vance was evolving into something unexpected. No longer the quiet vice president behind Trump's towering figure, he had become the calm counterbalance, the strategic enforcer with the cold steel mind and Midwest empathy. He didn't match Trump's bombast, but he didn't need to. He was becoming the tactician of Trumpism 2.0. In a closed-door GOP summit in Nashville, Vance addressed 80 top donors. "We don't win by shouting louder," he told them. "We win by being sharper, more grounded. We take the emotion of the movement and give it discipline." Many in the room, longtime backers of the MAGA movement, leaned in. They saw something in JD they hadn't expected. Leadership beyond loyalty. Vision beyond vengeance. Afterward, one senior donor whispered to another, "Trump may be the present, but JD's the future." Sitting in the Oval Office with a Diet Coke in hand, President Trump replayed clips from the hearing for the third time that day. Not because he needed to, but because it confirmed what he had long suspected. JD wasn't just vice president material. He was presidential. He turned to Stephen Miller and said, "When I picked Vance, the media said he'd be a loyal footnote. Guess what? He might write the next chapter." America was listening. Cable news continued to milk the hearing moment. College debate clubs studied it like it was the Lincoln-Douglas debates. High school civics classes played it as a model for modern political discourse. Podcasters, both left and right, couldn't stop talking about the Crockett clapback and the Vance verse. Even Saturday Night Live ran a sketch where Jasmine Crockett was played by a fierce Leslie Jones and JD Vance by a surprisingly articulate Chris Redd. But while the nation laughed, argued, and debated, the power balance had shifted. One moment, one exchange had elevated two contenders into the national consciousness. And their trajectories now seemed locked in a collision course toward the biggest stage of all, the White House. Flash forward, 2028 debate night. 5 years later. A stadium packed with 60,000 people. Millions watching from living rooms, airports, bars. On one side of the stage, Vice President JD Vance, Republican nominee for president, calm, clean-cut, ice steady. On the other, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, now the Democratic nominee, electric, fierce, standing tall in a crimson suit. The moderator adjusted his mic and smiled. Welcome, America, to the first presidential debate of 2028. JD turned to Jasmine. Jasmine nodded at JD. They had come full circle from that fiery congressional hearing to this ultimate showdown. But they weren't just debating policy anymore. They were debating the soul of the country. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the nation, every American watching knew. This moment started with a clapback.